This paper is an enigma. It makes very high triumphant claims. The authors are experienced and very smart. It was peer-reviewed in a top journal, the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. Yet it makes sophomoric mistakes. So what's going on here? You might be thinking, well, mistakes happen, stuff happens, so what? But not at this level. There's too much work that went into this paper. It took too long, too many researchers involved, and the mistakes were just too sophomoric, too ridiculous. You would get these right away. So it's not going to happen, except it happened. So what's going on? In this video, I will explain what's going on. So you have to understand the role that evolution plays because it's crucial. You have to understand the mindset of evolutionists. They're not testing evolution in research like this. They believe evolution is true. They insist evolution is true. This has enormous implications for the science. In this case, if evolution is true, then what? Well, first, there was a last universal common ancestor, billions of years ago, a single-cell organism, leading to all the tens of millions of species today. They all go back to this one last universal common ancestor, or LUCA. The genetic code and a lot of proteins must have arisen, must have evolved prior to the LUCA. They must have been in the LUCA. This is because they are so widespread in life. They are homologous across life. So they must go back to the LUCA. That's evolutionary theory. Now, number 2 and number 3 there are problematic for evolutionary theory, but that's another story. For now, I want to focus here on number 3. Proteins evolved before the LUCA. So that means protein-coding genes evolved. These protein-coding genes would be expressed and translated into a string of amino acids that would fold up into a native-like protein structure once the protein gene is evolved. Initially, it's more random. It's going to create a meaningless sequence of amino acids that's not going to do anything, most likely. So over the evolutionary process, you have these genes evolving, one mutation at a time. What's that process going to look like? Well, you're going to have a lot of long-range contacts evolving slowly over time because a mature native-like protein has a lot of long-range contacts. So long-range contacts were forming over time in this evolutionary process of protein evolution. Now, what's important to understand, again, getting back to this idea of the mindset of evolutionists, this is not a hypothesis for evolutionists. This happened. They know that this happened one way or another. They don't know the details, but they know that proteins evolved. These protein folds must have evolved, and the long-range contacts must have evolved over this process. The long-range contacts evolved one at a time over this process. They accrued over this process. They know that long-range contacts evolved. So simulating that process makes sense, and the details are not that important. In fact, they know that you really can't get the details. This was billions of years ago in an unknown environment, so you're not going to get the details right, but if you can have these long-range contacts form, then you are at least simulating with a little bit of accuracy the evolutionary process. You may not have gotten all those details right of why the long-range contacts formed, but they must have formed. Evolution underwrites this method. The truth of evolution, the fact, the certainty of evolution is underwriting this process. Again, the mindset. They know these proteins evolved, therefore they know these long-range contacts evolved. If they have a simulation where these long-range contacts are forming, then that's kind of like the evolutionary process, even if the details aren't quite right. So they're showing how evolution occurred. And a forward-looking fitness function is okay. Yes, that could not be what evolution actually used. That couldn't be the reality of the evolutionary process because evolution can't use forward-looking fitness functions. But if they use that in order to make the long-range contacts form, then so what? They at least are showing the pathway or a candidate pathway by which the long-range contacts would have formed, and then ultimately a protein fold would have arisen. So they're getting close to what happened. They're showing a candidate way that proteins could have evolved. The details aren't that important, and using a forward-looking fitness function, so what? Now, in reality, this is, of course, ridiculous. This could not have happened, and they are shortcutting, they're cheating, they're showing how something could have evolved, but it's impossible. This is an enormous physical problem. There's the chances of random mutations creating this protein coding gene are astronomically small. So it's not a big breakthrough as evolutionists would look at it, because they know evolution happened, they know the long-range contacts happened, and, well, they're showing candidate pathways. So their conclusions follow. They demonstrated how proteins could have evolved, not in all the details, but the pathway. Not because they have the correct fitness function, but because they have a fitness function that works. This is a subtle philosophy of science dynamic. Philosophers refer to this as theory ladenness. This is where the theory is kind of infecting the science. It's gotten into the science, and you're measuring things, and you're making inferences, and you're designing experiments with the truth of a theory in mind. But in this case, it's theory ladenness on steroids. It is deeply corrupting science. Evolution is a religious theory, and the religion has driven science to absurdity. Religion drives science, and it matters.